As always, for an exciting roundtable, let's introduce Keli Goff, contributing editor for Loop21.com, Armstrong Williams, host of the Armstrong Williams Show, Joe Madison, Sirius XM Radio's The Black Eagle, and the dapper one himself, Cornell Belcher, Obama 2012 pollster, looking all good. Cornell, he dressed up for us this week.
He did.
I mean, full, no tennis shoes or nothing. Right. So appreciate that, Cornell.
I love you, brother.
All right, let's get right into it. Cornell's all dressed up, but Congressman Bobby Rush dressed down. Joe, I thought the congressman had a flashback to his Black Panther days by wearing a hoodie on the floor of the House. Folks, check this out.
Racial profiling has to stop, Mr. Speaker. Just because someone wears a hoodie does not make them a hoodlum. The Bible teaches us, Mr. Speaker, in the book of Micah 6:6-8,
the member will suspend.
These words.
The member will.
These words. He has shown you, old man,
the member will
what is good. May God bless Trayvon Martin's soul.
Now, a lot of folks tried to say that, that was improper for a member of Congress, but I thought it was important to hit that most important line. Just because you're wearing a hoodie does not make you a hoodlum.
Yeah, you know, I actually wore a hoodie on air on MSNBC this week during my rant on the Trayvon Martin tragedy. But, you know, the way I see this, Roland, is we live in a world of what is legally right versus what is actually morally right. It may be legally right for George Zimmerman to be free. I think no one believes it's morally right for him to be free. And that's what I felt about this. According to the rules, it may technically have been improper for him to be on the floor in that. But I think the morally right thing to do is to allow us to have that moment of acknowledging what he was trying to call attention to. And the fact that Speaker Boehner actually did not blatantly denounce him, I think speaks to the fact that he's somewhat aware of that as well.
I think when I saw that, you understand why Congressional Black Caucus is relevant. I mean, it was such a powerful moment where Congressman Rush was giving voice to a community, not just a black community, but a community
of the Congress.
And there you saw them being the conscience of the Congress. And to me, it was a moment where I say, wow, I'm glad we have the Congressional Black Caucus.
I interviewed Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush, the next morning after that. The part that should have been played was when he talked about his son being murdered. This is very personal to him.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, what I really resent is Congressman Allen West's comments that he was thinking about in this right-wing demonization of showing up with footies and hoodies. And suggesting that this was totally out of place. This was an act of civil disobedience. He knew that he would be escorted off the floor, but he was sending a message as an activist, as a minister, as a father who had lost a son. And on April 10th, we've called for National Hoodie Day. We think everybody ought to wear a hoodie to show support to the Trayvon Martin family and to say to the legal authorities, we're watching you, whether it's a trial or a grand jury.
You know what? Look, Congressman Bobby Rush is a member of the United States Congress. There are many other forums where he has the opportunity to make a statement that was absolutely true, that if you wear a hoodie, it does not make you a criminal. The time and the place was not on the floor of the Congress.
That's ridiculous.
That is my opinion, and I have a right to my opinion, like you have a right to yours.
But it's a
ridiculous And I'm going to finish stating my opinion.
Okay,
I thought it was totally inappropriate. There was another place to do it, and while George Zimmerman should be in jail because of what he did, because if it were a white kid killing a black kid, there's no way he would not have been arrested. You should be outraged. But this protest has gone too far. It's being tried in the media. And to me, it's losing its credibility.
Let me tell you how ridiculous this is. You know what he sounds like? He sounds like those white folks in the South who told Martin Luther King that every protest was never appropriate. We've never had a protest in the United States of America where the other side thinks it ought to be appropriate. Bobby Rush doesn't need your opinion. Bobby Rush did what he thought was consciously right. And matter of fact, that's usually when you do get attention, when you bring it to places where you least expect it.
Why are you not out protesting then when these black kids are killing each other 95% of the time? Where is that outrage?
Actually,
we never see the same level.
Well,
it's not at this level.
It's
not this kind of attention.
Well, first of all, here's what's interesting. I spent 6 years in Chicago, and I've attended various events that Congressman Rush has actually had at his church. But here's also, I think, what is different. On shows like this, we speak about it. On shows like Joe's show, we speak about it. We talked about it on your show. I think part of the problem is when you have folks like Sean Hannity, who talks about black-on-black violence and where's the outrage, but is unwilling to bring his show to the south side of Chicago. If other folks are unwilling to bring their shows, and so black folks have been there. And I do believe what we're going to see out of this, we're going to see a different social movement take place, because where younger folks now feel empowered as a result. Because what got me with this whole case, I said it in the earlier panel, all of a sudden, when you saw 30, 40, 50, 60 cities, there was something that resonated about this case that made it different.
And the other thing I would add is I would actually, the issue of this becoming such a big story in the media, and why it's important to have protests like the one we saw with Representative Rush. International news outlets are covering the issue of racial profiling. They didn't even know it existed. How do I know that? Because I've been on some of those shows doing interviews at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning in these foreign countries where they actually, in the Daily Mail, for instance, they showed pictures of Prince Harry wearing a hoodie because they had no idea that black kids wearing hoodies in our country were being profiled. So this is the importance of having, you can't have too much media coverage is my point of this story. And the other thing I would just really quickly draw parallels to, Roland, is this sort of reminds me of how we knew that black kids were being killed in greater numbers than any other race going back to the 90s, going back to the 80s. It took Columbine for the rest of the country to get on board with the issue of gun violence and to have a serious conversation. That's what triggered the Million Mom March of white mothers. And I think that the Trayvon story getting the cover of People magazine, my point is this story is finally resonating and crossing over. And despite the tragedy of his death, I want his family to know that his death will not be in vain.
I'm old enough to remember, and sitting on this panel, when Emmett Till was killed.
That's right.
1955.
And wait a minute. And Jet Magazine
and Chicago Defender
published those photographs.
Right.
The criticism was it was an inappropriate form to put those photographs in. I can still remember those photographs. This is an Emmett Till moment.
Right.
And and everybody said Johnson Publication, Black Defender, shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have done it. Yes, they should have.
But America has reached a point where we should be outraged at the loss of human life. It should be not based on what they look
now
like.
You said should.
We should. But everybody, this is not something that the black community has ownership of. Everybody should have ownership of this tragedy.
But here's the deal, Armstrong, and this is the thing that I've said. I said this on CNN to white conservative commentators. Eric Erickson and I discussed this on his radio show, and he actually agreed. I said, Eric, I think the problem is when these kind of stories happen, folks like you say, you know what? And then when they see black folks, they say, oh, that's a black problem. Right. I remember when a pastor in Omaha, Nebraska was asked to participate in a pro-life march by a group of white evangelicals, and he said, I'll walk with you, but I want y'all to help me take down the crack houses. They actually said, that's your problem. And so I agree with you, but I think what happens with this case, when black folks are mobilizing, is forcing other people to deal with their consciousness. Why Bobby Rush wearing that hoodie is important? Because what he's saying is, let's deal with your stereotypes, Cornell. And so remember, Viola Liuzzo left Michigan, a white woman in Michigan, to help register black folks in Alabama.
In Chicago.
Father Frank. 1 second, I'm going to go to Cornell.
Right.
I think this is a healthy debate to have, and I get frustrated when I see the right saying, oh, they're trying to racialize it, they're trying to make it a race case. We need to make it a race case because you know what? It's not a bad thing to talk about race. So when you say you're making this a racial, well, the history of our country has been divided by racial issues, and we need to have this conversation. Don't stop the conversation by trying to say it's racial and making that a negative thing. That's a good thing.
Remember what started this was Geraldo. Now, let's be honest. Geraldo really started that.
But Kelly, here's the deal, though, and I want you to answer this here. By raising the point of the hoodies, I believe when you get to the consciousness and say it's not the clothes, because remember, before the hoodies, it used to be the stocking caps, and then it was if you turn your baseball cap around. So I think by this, it is causing us to discuss stereotypes in clothing.
I'm so glad you said that, because I actually wrote a column where I compared this to the modern day Emmett Till, the turning point for our country. And Geraldo actually reached out and asked me to come on his radio show to talk about it. And we had a really constructive conversation, because what I tried to explain to him, and I felt like he heard me, and he said, you know, I hadn't really thought of that, which is that Condoleezza Rice has been racially profiled. You know, Oprah Winfrey has been racially profiled multiple times.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, when in Sanford, talked about his 3 sons, 2 lawyers and a congressman, both of them profiled and arrested. And in fact, the racial profiling focus in America was a result of upper to middle class black folks who were pulled over, who called the sharpness in the Jackson and said, even we're getting pulled over.
When I'm driving in D.C., I can't tell you how many times late at night I've been pulled over doing absolutely nothing, and I have to get out of my car. I got to show, evidence of insurance and all this, and I've even had to take, walking tests to say that I'm not drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning.
And I told Geraldo that I'd had the same experiences in stores, and he was stunned. And this is after I'd been appearing on TV, Roland. That makes it even, And so my point is, there are people out there who really were under the impression that it was as simple as a hoodie. It was as simple as baggy jeans. And I'm going
to use one name, Ennis William Cosby. His killer got on the telephone after he shot him and bragged that he had, these are his words, he had shot a nigger, and it's all over television. We forget that here was a kid who had one of the richest fathers in America, lived in an upper middle class neighborhood, and he was shot and killed simply because he was profiled and he was black. We should be beyond it, but we're not. I want
to give Armstrong the last word by setting it up this way, and I got a short amount of time with your answer. Is the problem that is racialized, or are we simply afraid of having the conversation because, frankly, it oftentimes is a difficult one to have for people of whether you black, white, Hispanic, or Asian? And so we're scared of the difficulty of the conversation as opposed to actually having it.
I think the problem is that we're protesting and communicating with the wrong people. We have to communicate with all of America to solve this problem. And I think sometimes when we try to make it that it's a black issue, only we can deal with it, it excludes somebody else. But the people that you need to be talking to are the people that continue to be excluded from the conversation, because especially if you see them as part of the problem.
Well, I'll say this here. One of the things I've realized about African Americans is that and I go back to letters from a Birmingham jail, when white pastors were told Dr. King, that's too much, and he said, the title of the book was, Why We Can't Wait. And our history has been very clear. When African Americans forced America to deal with these problems, if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Movement, white America would not have confronted its own problems. And so our history has said, when we speak up and force you to deal with it, then you deal with it. But if we don't force them to deal with it, we ain't having a conversation.
And if it wasn't for the black media,
absolutely,
it wouldn't have been covered.